It's been a big year. Lots of cards. 4 regular sets. Each one of those has at least 2 commander decks, 1 draftable commander set, and 4 more commander decks with that, and 4 more commander decks about Warhammer. And we got some Street Fighters, we got some Transformers, we got some Commander Legal Space Amusement Park cards too. Oh, and a new Jumpstart set also. This is going to be a look back at a tiny percentage of those commanders that seem interesting to me, but I didn't get to do an episode about because I don't put out episodes daily. But before we do, just a touch of business, and I promise I'll be quick about it. Here's 2 ads, a fake one and a real one. Do you love the spirit of gift giving and you're not looking forward to the rest of the year being a dull and dreary time without a lot of gifts going around? Well, then you need the Phyrexian Subscription Fun Box by Darksteel Industries. Each month we'll send a package to your door with lots of fun stuff in it, like a t-shirt of your favorite Praetor, either size 4XL or super ultra diminutive, a sticker, a cool ice cube tray to make ice cubes in the shape of Phyrexian incantation runes. Jiggle them around in your glass. Try to read what they say out loud while no light of the sun can be seen from your position. All of these things and more sent to you monthly for the low subscription cost of whatever you think is fair. Cancel anytime. And now the real ad from the Wizard Tower, wizardtower.com, your website for cool articles on different decks, different formats, metagames, all sorts of fun strategy guides. And if you're listening from Canada, you can use coupon code BREWBROTHERS to get discount on your Magic singles. That's the perfect kind of deal for someone who likes to actually know what they're getting when things get sent to because you picked it. Now, back to the show. I'm going to do my best here to go in chronological order. I'm not going to talk about the Stranger Things because although we got new MTG real versions of those cards this year, the originals came out in 2020. I'm going to mention why I think these commanders have some potential, maybe an idea or two about what to do with them. Who knows, if any of these seem really exciting, I might do a future episode on one of them if there isn't another 500 cards coming out in 2023. I mean 500 commanders, which makes me wonder how many actual commanders did come out this year to Scryfall. That is a lot. Anyway, let's get to this. First up, the Street Fighters. Looking at the Street Fighters, I'm definitely drawn to Ken Burning Brawler. This is a Boros identity, and getting to cast free spells from your hand, not all free, it has to be less than the damage Ken did, but that seems pretty powerful. A little bit of equipment to pump up Ken's power to be able to cast even bigger spells, maybe something for evasion. I'm thinking Mana Geyser to just make a ton of mana. If we can get Ken's power up to 5, then this will add a bunch of mana for free, and now we can do everything else in our hand. Definitely running a Reconstruct history in most Boros decks from this point forward. It's big card advantage, and even something like Wheel of Fate. We're not allowed to cast this without suspending it unless we're able to do it from some sort of trickery like this. Super cheap Wheel of Fortune. And I think Zangief the Red Cyclone is also interesting. This is obviously very similar to Zurgo, but now we're in Jund instead of Mardu. That means we get green instead of white. So we get way more ramp. If we do excess damage, that creature's controller has to sacrifice something, and with 7 power, that's very likely. It has to be blocked if able. I don't see how our opponents are getting out of this. Then we can put in stuff like Mayhem Devil to take advantage of the stuff our opponents are sacrificing to do extra damage. Mazarek Crowl Death Priest also helps out when people sacrifice things, our opponents included. And throw in a couple of things like Crux of Fate on our turn so that Zangief is indestructible. There you go. Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I'm going to start off with a Gruul commander from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and that's Kaima the Fractured Calm. I do love goading. Some people will say that goading is being overdone. It was a very exciting mechanic when it came out. I think the public generally loved it, and perhaps they went overboard on it. It's starting to get a little bit salty. Nonetheless, every end step we're goading each creature our opponents control that are enchanted by auras we control. So we want to look at auras that have a positive effect, and then we got to make sure we protect Kaima the Fractured Calm. If we're planning on buffing up our opponent's creatures, that's cool when they have to attack each other, but if they want to turn on us, that starts to get less interesting. Rancor is an obvious one. If we put it on our opponent's creature and then they get into combat and it ends up dying, or maybe they sacrifice it or something, we get to put it back in our hand. Obviously, if their sack outlet is on board, we shouldn't try to enchant anything of theirs. Aspect of the Mongoose is especially interesting because it doesn't give the trample or the power boost that Rancor does, but it also makes it impossible to target. It gives it Shroud, and it still comes back to our hand. This is a very interesting one to put on opposing creatures. I want to highlight Snake Umbra to point out a trap that is potentially easy to fall into. Some auras give the creature an ability, but you'll notice this aura gives the ability to the creature it's on. We control the aura, an opponent controls the creature, and it's the creature that says you may draw a card, referring to the creature's owner, not us. Just be careful you're not giving your opponents extra abilities thinking you'll get them. Shorakai Genesis Engine is also very interesting to me. I don't have any cool ideas for a brew at the moment, but it's interesting as an Azorius card because it gives us something to do with our mana if we're not using it, if we're holding up a counter spell or something like that. Draw 2, discard 1 is going up a card for 1 mana, and we get a 1/1 token, which is also very valuable. Not only that, if we really wanted to, we could eventually use those little tokens to crew this thing and start attack. I think it's an excellent Azorius control commander without being super duper threatening like some of them are. You might shake off a little bit of hate. Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos also seems very cool to me. Rakdos Commander, sack outlet in the command zone, very nice. Rakdos loves that kind of stuff. Plus that ability is good, and we can do a lot of neat stuff like that. Shadow of Mortality is a card that, well, this is 15. If we can make sure this is on top of the deck, we can do 15 damage to something. And there's great cards like Scheming Symmetry to make it happen. It's a little bit political. We get to pick someone who can maybe tutor up something. Maybe you make a deal that says, I promise I can help you tutor as long as you promise that it's going to be something to deal with that thing over there that's threatening the whole table. And then you put your thing on top and do 15 damage to whatever you want. Streets of New Capenna. It is tough to compete with all the legendaries and multiple colors from the commander decks in New Capenna, but there is a few interesting ones I haven't really gotten to brew around yet. Best Soul Nourisher, I like that it's a simple, clean game plan. It's probably super cheap deck to make too. You make a ton of 1/1s, Best gets huge, Best attacks, and your whole army of 1/1s also gets huge. Obviously, we could amp this up by putting on those super duper expensive enchantments that double tokens, but I'm not into that. My budget's more around the $3 for Scute Swarm. It's a great way to have a ton of 1/1s come into play. Best gets pretty big pretty quick. Maybe something like a Bear Umbra that lets us tap out, make a bunch of 1/1s to make Best huge. Then when we attack, we get to untap all our lands to hold up different protection spells for Best. I also think Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer is very interesting. Am I saying interesting too much? I've said the word interesting 100 times so far. Although we can discount Oscar's cost, this will help on tax, but it's limited. There's only so many mana values you can get in the graveyard. But that second ability, that's what it's all about. There's a million ways to discard cards, non-lands included. I like Bog Witch as a way to put something into the graveyard as well as get 3 mana towards casting it. Dreamscape Artist, my favorite blue ramp spell. We get to put something in the graveyard that Oscar can cast, and we're going to get 2 basics that come into play untapped, so it's like we also have 2 mana towards that spell we just discarded. Grimoire of the Dead's another interesting way to discard cards. It only costs 1, and the payoff here is undeniable. Our opponents will have to do something about this before we get to keep discarding all our creatures that we haven't cast. We'll get their creatures. It's good. And there's always a proliferate option. Demir decks are pretty good there. Commander Legends, Battle for Baldur's Gate. Gale Waterdeep Prodigy. We've got backgrounds, so we got to think about what color we want to pair with. Whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery, we get to cast one of the other type from our graveyard. Then it's exiled. So right off the top of my head, I think I want to go Simic with this. This is going to be fantastic for a real counterspell type of annoying deck that some metas just hate. Proceed with caution. I like green because I can use my green sorceries to cast a bunch of ramp spells, hold up some blue instants, and whenever I do cast that instant, I get to cast another ramp spell from the graveyard. And I'm probably going to lean towards really cheap sorceries that draw cards because, as I said, I want to hold up instants, and when I do cast one, I want to get stuff like my sorceries. Extra draw, extra ramp. Seems good. And what background? I don't think it matters. There's no green ones that really go well with the plan. Maybe Master Chef because it's sort of useful, or maybe just Hardy Outlander because it's the cheapest one. Again, it's just here for the color identity. I wish they would make more backgrounds so that we didn't have to do this. Jahira, Friend of the Forest. Similarly, all tokens become ramp. If it's a token creature, it'll have Summoning Sickness. We won't get to tap it right away. But if it's something like an artifact token, we will get to use that right away. So this becomes a creature where making non-creature tokens is basically free mana. If we can spend 2 to make 2 tokens, we've got a net gain of 0. That's looking like Storm to me. I would definitely want to pair this with red for Street Urchin, because now all of those tokens, let's assume they're artifacts. I mean, even if they were creatures, they would be fine. But artifacts, as I said, they can tap right away. We can use the one that the artifact itself generates and then sacrifice itself. 1 damage to any target. We don't have to tap any lands to do it. And if we don't need to do that, we can just keep banking those tokens and save up for a huge Comet Storm. Now a couple of non-background commanders from Baldur's Gate. Mazzy, True Sword Paladin. This is very similar to the one from Neon Dynasty I talked about earlier. We're suggesting our opponents attack each other, but we're not outright goading them. I think this one might be better. I mean, we get an extra color, which is always nice. And we're still looking to put cool auras on our opponent's creatures Hopefully a little bit of a political move. Maybe you don't attack me. I can help you out, make your creature a little stronger. Here's an example of an enchantment that we do want to run with this sort of thing. Keen Sense goes on an opposing creature, and this is the aura saying that you draw a card. We control the aura, we draw the card. But I think now that we have white, I'm interested in stuff like Flickering Ward. We can enchant their creatures with protection from whatever color makes the most sense. If a mutual opponent has a ton of red creatures, well, protection from red. Now their creature can attack without any resistance. Since they're not goated, they can choose, so let's make it very easy for them. And if they don't want to help out, we can always return it back to our hand. And from Brosthers War, I think Audacity is very cool too. It's like Rancor, a little bit worse, but I'll take a backup. And then there's always Enchantress's Presence, something like that, so that while we're dropping all these enchantments, we just keep drawing cards. Then there's Nira Wild Mage. So originally when I looked at this card, I kind of wrote it off because it's just too risky. You play a spell, you get a free one. Obviously, you'd want to swing big. So you want to put in a ton of 1-mana spells and a ton of multiple mana spells. And you're just flipping coins. Hopefully, I cast a small thing and I hit a big thing. I can always cast a bunch of small things though. That's the thing. You don't need to always hit a big thing. If I can afford to cast 3 or 4 small things, that seems like pretty good odds I'll hit a big thing. And then when we hit stuff like Aminatu's Augury, well, I didn't just hit one big spell, I hit a bunch more spells. Or maybe a Mnemonic Deluge? This card's only $1.50. It seems powerful, especially if you can cheat on the cost. I mean, triple casting anything from any graveyard? Dominaria United. This first one is from the commander deck from Dominaria United, and that's Shanid Sleeper's Scourge. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Shanid, except to say that there's a ton of legendary creatures that want to be in Mardu decks that are based on attacking, so giving them all menace is excellent. And there's a lot of legendary lands that are fairly cheap that just tap for red or black or white or something simple like that. I don't think we can harm our mana base too badly by putting a ton of quote-unquote free draw by just putting some lands into play. I guess we're paying a life too. I'm also interested in General Marholt Eld's Dragon. This is breakable. We're already a 4/4, and whenever a creature becomes blocked, it gets bigger for each creature blocked. So obviously we want to focus on lure effects. Lure being the most famous one. Nemesis Mask is a way to do that for creatures that stays on the battlefield. Once that lured creature hits, it might die. Maybe they have a death touch or something. It'll probably be big enough though that it might not. Anyway, Nemesis Mask is a nice way to keep this effect going, even if the enchantment that's on the creature goes to the graveyard. And if you're attacking with a ton of power and toughness, Trample's great, but Trample Death Touch is even better. Weirdly, again, I mean, this is probably for a reason, but there isn't a single piece of equipment that grants both of them straight up. That's where Nylea's dream team of her bow, giving everything we have Death Touch, and Nylea herself, original, giving all of our creatures Trample. Way to go, Nylea. And lastly, I want to talk about Stang Echo Warrior. A full copy that copies all of the equipment and enchantments, that's incredible. For no other reason than Pattern of Rebirth. The copy will die because we sacrifice it, then we get a free creature card right into the battlefield. Rinse, repeat. Warhammer 40,000, 40k, 4 score and 10,000. Is that even the right number? The 40k commander decks gave us a ton of fun stuff to work with. Abbadon the Despoiler is one that is really tempting to try to break. As long as our opponents have lost life, all of our stuff has Cascade. So obviously we're interested in the spells that are expensive on the top, but we actually don't pay as much. We're talking Treasure Cruise and we're talking Dig Through Time. These are 7s and 8s, but we really only cast them for 1 or 2 most of the time, so we will cascade into almost anything. This deck also gave us Blood for the Blood God, which is another huge spell that basically becomes super cheap when you cast it. As long as a bunch of creatures died, this thing can be 3. And the beauty of this one is it refills our hand. If we can get a bunch of creatures to die, maybe we sacrifice a bunch of them, we don't even have to get to combat. This thing will do enough damage that everything will certainly cascade. And then I think a nice angle to go with Abbadon will be to put in spell cost reducers. Nightscape Familiar ensures that all of our red and blue spells cost 1 less. Jace's Sanctum, all of our instants and sorceries are 1 less. Primal Amulet, yet again, maybe we don't flip it, or maybe we do because it's too cool to copy spells, but we could be able to get most of our spells so that we're paying very little mana for them, but their cost and mana value at the top of the card is high enough that we keep cascading with them. It's very tempting. And I'm also very interested in the political aspects of Nayam Shai Murad. Obviously, you want to make out the deal. I'll give you something, you give me something. Does that seem fair? Cool. But I think the more interesting brew, certainly more challenging anyway, would be to how to do it so that we can control what's in our graveyard. I'll give you back the worst thing in your graveyard, and I'm not going to give you a choice of what you got to give me back, because there won't be anything but good stuff. This is where Delve comes into play, like Murderous Cut. Keep that graveyard nice and empty except for the good stuff. Lion Sash from Kamigawa. Just pay a white to exile a card from a graveyard. And this thing gets bigger too, so that's also a nice bonus. Unlicensed Hearse is a way to exile 2 cards for free from a graveyard. And this thing gets big, but this thing's like over $10 already. Surprising to me. Unfinity. It's easy to look past the Unfinity cards because they're mostly gimmicky, and some of them certainly are, but Magar of the Magic Strings seems like it's got potential here. We've got to do a little bit of work because we've got to make sure that the creature gets in for combat damage, and we have to protect it. There's a lot of ways this could go wrong, but the potential's very high. We can leverage stuff like Ulrich the Lore Mage. We can put something in our graveyard right before we want to note it and put it onto the battlefield. I mean, I might toss in an Ingarrick's Wake. That seems like a fun one to cast for just doing a little bit of combat damage. And then we'll want stuff like Anger to make sure that we can attack right away with these things. I definitely don't want to wait a whole turn cycle for. And the beauty about Key to the City is it also discards a card, which is good for what we want to do, and it makes the thing unblockable, which is kind of everything we want. This card's perfect for that deck. Another commander that came out that is legal in Commander from the Unfinity set is Myra the Magnificent. I also get the impression that Myra kind of runs the amusement park. It's kind of her thing, but I'm not a Vorthos guy, so I'm not sure. Anyway, this one deals with the attractions. What are attractions, you may ask? That's what I asked because I had no idea. If you want to use attractions, you have to bring a unique attraction deck, which consists of, at minimum, 10 attractions, all with different names. Singleton. There are 22 legal attractions. A lot of them are fairly bad, not really important, but there's a few good ones. If you have an open attraction, every turn on your main phase, at the beginning, you roll 1 6-sided die. And if any of your attractions have that number lit up, there's little lights in the corner, then you get to visit it, which means do the thing on the card. I haven't dug super deep, but I do know that all attractions are a hit on 6. You visit on a 6. And there's always at least another number, but there's different printings of them and there's different other numbers. So I guess it's up to you. Would you rather bring a bunch of different attractions that have a variety of numbers, so you're always getting something? Or would you rather have a huge payoff so that if you hit a 6 or a 4, you get everything? Let's go back to Myra for a second. All you have to do is cast an instant or sorcery to open an attraction. Opening means you put it into play. It can be destroyed and everything, but it won't be long before we have a bunch of attractions. It's not hard to cast 10 spells, and is it? Then every turn we have a chance to spike a ton of value. I think in addition, you definitely want to have something like Barbarian class, just for that ability that whenever you roll one, you get to roll 2 and you discard the lowest one. And since we're aiming for a 6, it might make sense to try to pick all your attractions that hit on a 5 and a 6. I haven't done the math, but I feel like that's better for Barbarian class. You have to discard the lowest one. And while we're on it, probably will Blade of Frontiers. It's a backup of that Barbarian class ability. And I haven't even talked about Myra's other ability. You can put some pretty powerful spells on an attraction. You have to spread them out, and it would make them a little bit of a target. They can be destroyed after all. They're artifacts. But once you load up a couple of them, every time you hit, if we go the route where we're just hitting everything at once, we're going to get a ton of extra value from the attractions and those extra spells in there. A couple of the more fun attractions include Hall of Mirrors. We could definitely include a few creatures with that make it excellent to copy. I don't know, maybe a Goblin Electromancer to make spells cheaper. Swinging Ship is pretty nice because we get an extra combat step. Trash Bin's just a good thing to mill ourselves. That puts more things in the graveyard for Myra to exile, and we get something back. But I think Storybook Ride is the best one of these. This is definitely the payoff that we want. This is the reason to make all of your attractions hit off of a 5 if possible. That just gives us access to so many more cards every turn if we hit. And if we don't use them, they go on the bottom, so we don't have to worry about decking ourselves. You know, this one seems pretty fun. Gimmicky, but I like a gimmick deck. And then Game Night. There's new cards in Game Night. Just 5 of them, but that's 5 more commanders. There's only 5 new cards from the Game Night set, but there's a couple that I think are worth talking about. Zamriel, Seraph of Steel. That's the white one. Seems like a strong add to any equipment deck. I don't know that I'd brew around Zamriel specifically, but I might add her to another equipment deck, probably Boros. And I'm just mentioning Maeve, Insidious Singer, because the ability to goad creatures is fun to me, and we get to draw a card. Brosthers War. That's the set we're in right now. We're up to right now. Okay, now that we're into the present set, it's less that I have forgotten about some of these and more that there just isn't enough time to get to all of these commanders. In Brosthers War, I think Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, such a powerful ability, $20 card. If your opponents let you cast Gix and then let you untap with 7 mana, they're in for some trouble. Probably. By then you'll know not to target like the control player because you don't want to hit a bunch of counter spells. And obviously discarding 1 or 2 cards for this effect is kind of lame. We have to bank a bunch of cards. Cards like Grim Haruspex, so that when we do sacrifice a creature dies, we're actually drawing cards, we're replacing it. And I think for the surprise factor, maybe we wait until we can somehow manage to put together 10 mana, cast Gix, and then right away activate. So Dark Ritual comes in handy for something like that. Maybe we do a black market thing. We've already sacrificed a bunch of stuff. Black market pays out a ton of mana, and we just do it all at once. I also think Titania, Voice of Gaia, has a lot of potential too. Pretty cheap to cast, comes down on 3. The key is we have to have 4 lands in the graveyard and a special non-basic land, but tutoring non-basics are so easy now with things like crop rotation. There's tons of cards like that. Nylea's Intervention, it costs way more than crop rotation, but we get to search up X non-basics. And something like Pier's Whim as well. I think this is a useful card. It'll quite often hit 3 artifacts and enchantments, our 3 foes, and it doesn't say basic. Jumpstart 2022. Okay, and then there's Jumpstart too, so there's just so many cards. When did Jumpstart come out? Like December 11th? I don't even know. Argus Kos is a Boros commander, and it kind of has the Zada ability. It kind of stinks that we have to pay 2 to copy 1 thing across our whole team, but I'll take it. Can't do the same kind of Zada shenanigans where we also just cast numerous things on Zada and copy it, because we'll run out of mana to be able to do that. Unless we do something like Traitorous Greed. We can gain control of our own Argus. Not only does it give the whole team haste and untaps them, it'll add 2 mana of any one color for each time this is copied. That's how we're going to pay for a bunch more of these things. I think this card is clutch. Alondra Skydreamer, it seems like a yawn at first. You only get 1 Drake when you draw your 2nd card each turn. I mean, we can get that on opponents' turns if we can draw 2 cards during their turns, but it's so much more disappointing than Talrand. However, being able to draw a 5th card, making all Drakes, which I assume will have evasion, plus X, which is like what, +7, we had to draw 5 for it to happen, so I'm minimum +5, most likely around +10. You don't need too many Drakes to kind of do some serious damage that way. I mean, obviously Talrand also does go in, because then we get more Drakes. And I am also interested in Rodolph Duskbringer. Expensive commander, but a 4/4 flying Death Touch lifelink is pretty impressive. We're Orzhov because of that activated ability, and being able to return anything from the graveyard to the battlefield seems extremely strong. All we have to do is be able to gain life on a whim. It's very easy to do in Magic. I think Ailey Eternal Pilgrim is just perfect. You can sacrifice a creature to gain a bunch of life. That puts something in the graveyard to reanimate, and we have gained the life, so we can definitely do it. And Ailey's other ability is very scary. 3 mana, exile anything. Life gain decks don't have a lot of trouble getting 10 more than their initial. And the best part is, Ailey won't be in the command zone. Nobody lets you gain a ton of life if they see Ailey sitting there in the command zone, but they won't see her there, unless they've played this deck with you a bunch. Honestly, I forgot that quite a few of these even existed. I suppose the positive spin on this is that there's never been a better time to have a chance to run into a deck you've never even seen before. I try to bring you brew ideas that are a little less common. I hope to inspire you to come up with some cool brews yourself and show you a couple of tools how to do that along the way. It's been a great year, and if you've been enjoying my content, I would really love a like and a subscribe. If you do want to support, the most direct way to do that is through patreon.com/commandersbrew or buying cards through the link below. I hope you have a great year too, and that 2023 is even better for you. You keep being you. The world's a better place for it. See you next year. But like this year, this video won't come out before 2023. Oh, and if you want to check out my favorite deck idea this year, it might be this Elminster deck. It did seem like it would be just another Azorius control shell, but there's some fun surprises in there. Check it out.